This is the American Forces Network, Europe.
The American Forces Network Europe resumes its coverage of the Apollo 15 moon mission, coverage provided by the major American radio networks and relayed to Europe by a satellite by the American Forces Radio and Television Service. Shortly, the two Apollo moon explorers will begin their third and final excursion on the lunar surface, and we switch now to NBC News.
NBC News, the flight of Apollo 15. Good morning. This is Peter Hackess along with Wilson Hall at the Apollo Space Center. At the moment, the two astronauts on the moon, astronauts Scott and Irwin, have been awakened. They have gone through their usual morning procedure and have checked in with Houston. At the moment, they're going through another series of checklists in preparation for going out onto the lunar surface again for their third and final traverse of their monumental Apollo 15 flight. Wilson?
They are about an hour behind schedule this morning, and behind schedule, that means getting out of the landing craft and getting into their rover. They are going to take it very easy today. About an hour or so ago, Joe Allen from Mission Control in Houston told them that they had already, in their first two trips on the moon, had already accomplished 100% of their primary scientific objectives. And he said from now on, it's gravy all the way. And today they're just going to play it cool and take it easy and take a trip around and see some more interesting geology. Originally, they had planned for about 6 hours of their travel about on the third trip. Now they're going to cut that to about 4 or 5 hours. Again, the liftoff time, the time that Scott and Irwin lift off the moon to go back to hook up with the command ship, the Endeavour, that was scheduled for later on today, or later on this morning, as a matter of fact, and they're going to try to stick to that. In other words, it's about, they prepare for the ascent to about 4 hours from now. This is very rough indeed. And they leave the moon about 1 o'clock, that's Eastern time, 1 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time. So they have cut their EVA today, their extravehicular activity, the third day on the moon. They've cut that trip a little short, and as I said, all they're going to do is just take a little buggy ride and see some more interesting geology. Since the scientists on the ground, the geologists and the scientists, are fascinated with the collections that they have made during the past 2 days, saying that they have already done 100% of their scientific mission, have collected up to 156, 157 pounds of rock, which is delighting all of those scientists and geologists on the ground. Today, essentially, they will supposed to hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stations, each of them, again, taking ground samples, making panoramic photographs, taking more samples, making photograph samples. That's about what they're supposed to do. But instead of the 6 stops originally planned for, they'll probably only have 3 or so, again, to hold to the schedule to get off the moon at the time they want to. Again, the ascent from the moon is scheduled for 1:11. That's Eastern Daylight Time this afternoon. So they will make that on time. They have to make that on time because of the orbiting Endeavour with astronaut Worden, which is still circling the moon about 60 miles above the moon's surface. Worden himself was awakened about an hour or so ago to the strains of Tijuana Brass. They played up to him. If that doesn't wake him up, I don't know what will. Peter?
Well, we estimated yesterday, Wilson, just on the basis of looking at what they were doing and having some small prior knowledge of what they'd done on past flights, that they were picking up about 100 pounds of moon rocks to bring back, and by golly, when they got all finished, it looked like, 103 pounds they came up with. That wasn't a bad guess. They were out for 7 hours and 13 minutes yesterday. Today's work schedule, as Wilson has said, has been cut back by, about 2 hours from the original plan. Not for any reasons of emergency, but merely because they've come through so beautifully. beautifully over the last couple of days. They've done 100% of their primary scientific objectives. And as Capcom Joe Allen told them this morning, from here on out, it's gravy all the way. We're just going to play it cool, take it easy, and see some interesting geology. Of course, again today, they'll be using that wonderful lunar rover of theirs, the mechanized moon buggy, which for the first time is taking man around to see the sights of the moon. They'll be going to some interesting places. They're heading out in the opposite direction of yesterday's traverse. This time they'll be going, starting out straight west of the lunar lander at Hadley Base. So they come to the edge of Hadley Rill, and they're going to take a trip along the side of Hadley Rill, a place called the Terrace. And then you'll be hearing such names as the Scarp, Link Crater, Chain Crater, North Complex, Eagle Crest, Pluton, and various others which will come into view as they approach them. And we should have a day of very interesting geology. Certainly as they say, the boys in the back room, the geologists at Houston and elsewhere are studying this. They're going to have another full day. Hadley Rill, which we have heard about for the last 3 days, and we'll hear much more about today because they get closer to it. Hadley Rill is actually the gorge. It's a winding canyon. It's about 1,000 feet deep, about a mile wide. And it runs along that part of the moon for about 62 miles. It's always mystified scientists, moon scientists, all science. It looks like a dry riverbed, but there's no evidence of water ever existed on the moon's surface, so the consensus is, and it's always just a consensus with scientists, there are always people who disagree, but the consensus is that the Hadley Rill, the gorge, several like it, were lava channels. In other words, when the molten rock flowed down from the base of those towering Apennine Mountains, when the hot rock, lava rock came down, it gorged out the Hadley Rill, or the gorge. Also, before they link up with the command ship, before the takeoff from the moon, again scheduled for 1:11 this afternoon, Eastern Time, sometime between the time they take off and the time after they hook up with the command ship, they will do another little interesting thing. I'm not sure how they're going to do this, but somehow or another they're going to officially cancel the first stamp of the series of the moon. It's the new U.S. stamp depicting Apollo 15 in their lunar vehicle rover. This stamp goes on sale today for those of you who collect stamps. It goes on sale today at post offices in Cape Kennedy, in Huntsville, Alabama, and Houston. But the stamp will be officially canceled by Scott and Irwin from the moon. So they'll do that while they're on the moon. I don't know what they do. They don't have a canceller, do they, Peter? They just say, I think they do. I think they have some kind of a canceling machine. It's certainly not a big one, obviously. And whatever it is, you may be sure it's fireproof, because everything they take with them these days is fireproof, including the pages of their checklist. You know, everything inside the space cabin since our unfortunate experience of a few years back. Everything must be fireproof. That stamp is an interesting one. It's rarely that the United States does it. They've done it once or twice before. It's a double stamp. One side has the astronauts in their lunar buggy, and the other side, the two stamps that join together, has the lunar module. So it's going to be an interesting stamp. Will go on sale, as Wilson said, across the country today, or rather tomorrow. About 200 million of the stamps are being printed. Traverse 3, as we said, is going to proceed outward from Hadley Base toward Hadley Rill. And some of the pictures and some of the views that they will see are going to be of the most spectacular kind. The inside of that rill, the steep walls, are something that the scientists, ever since we've been looking at the moon, have wanted to see. 500 millimeter lens is going to be used again, and that kind of close-up is going to be most interesting to see. They hope that they can give scientists much more data to analyze on just how the rill was formed and what's there. This is an area, again, I should say this public area. They'll proceed up to what's called the North Complex. They'll see some volcanic-type craters, and they'll cover a large area. This is basically a 6-hour traverse, but as you've heard, they've spent about 2 hours away from it. Originally, it was supposed to be about 32 miles, but it's not going to be quite that long. 12 kilometers. And one of the constraints, again, is the walk-back time from the furthest point. That's uppermost in everyone's mind in case the lunar rover, which actually has behaved very well, in case it breaks down, they'll have enough time and enough ability to get back to their home base, which is so important, particularly today when they're about to take off. Rejoin the orbiting command and service module. While the command module is orbiting the moon, and there's a total of 74 orbits in all, as you've heard, some very important scientific information is being collected, both in photography and in scientific instrumentation, as to the nature of the particles which surround the moon, the charged particles, as to the nature of the moon itself, its gravitational pull, its mass, and particularly they're trying to investigate what are called mass signs. These mysterious mass concentrations which have showed up in various parts of the moon. In other words, when one orbits the moon, unlike the Earth, which is pretty uniform all the way around, in orbiting the moon, they found that the orbit is perturbed here and there, very slightly. And, in other words, instead of being a perfect circle, there are little bumps. Now, these aren't sharp bumps, as you and I know them, but they're bumpy enough so that the scientists, in studying the data, know that there's something inside the moon which gives it a little more mass, a little more gravitational pull at these particular points. And one of the things they're trying to do with this instrumentation is to find out exactly where those are located and perhaps get an idea of what it is, what kind of material inside the moon, just under the surface, is creating these so-called mass signs. There are a number of places, as Wilson Hall told you, that are going to be visited today. It's another day, obviously, of surprises, places to be visited for the very first time. Starting out from the Hadley base, which is the headquarters, where the lunar module is located, they'll travel directly westward, headed for that canyon-like Hadley Rill. And it is a canyon. It's just very much like the Grand Canyon in that it wanders along for, a little over 80 miles on the lunar surface. At some points, it's 1 mile wide or so. And they believe that it's, perhaps 1,200 feet deep, which is a rather large and long canyon. That's the place that they're headed today, and that's one of the important stops along the way, with lots of picture taking. They hope possibly to get some samples right at the edge to find out what the wall is like. There is some thought that if they can see what the inner wall of Hadley Rill is composed of, they can get a pretty good idea of what the moon was like when Hadley Rill was formed.
And Dave and Jim, basically the EVA is going to last somewhere between 4 and 5 hours, so it'll be a short EVA. I'm told that we checked off the 100% science completion square sometime during EVA 1 or maybe even shortly into EVA 2. From here on out, it's gravy all the way. and we're just going to play it cool, take it easy, and see some interesting geology. It should be a most enjoyable day. Over.
Okay, Joe. We're looking forward to it. They're looking forward to the third and last day, Scott and Irwin, that they will have on the moon. They will be getting out of the Falcon in a few minutes from now, scheduled to make their third surface journey. Takeoff from the moon scheduled for 1:11 Eastern Time this afternoon. Wilson Hall, NBC News at the Apollo Space Center. This is Peter Hackess with Wilson Hall at the NBC News Apollo Space Center, continuing with NBC Radio's live coverage of today's events on the moon. It's called EVA number 3, the third lunar traverse by astronauts Scott and Irwin. At the moment, they're about an hour behind. There's no emergency, nothing really pressing. They decided to let the astronauts have an hour more rest because of the events of the day, which will certainly be busy. This is, I believe, one of the busiest of the 3 busy days on the moon, because after their final tour of the moon today, they will return to the lunar lander and take off to rejoin the orbiting command and service module. EVA 3 had been planned for 6 hours. As it is now, it'll be about 5 hours, perhaps even a little less. And there's nothing really pressing the astronauts because all of the major targets have been accomplished. All of the science has been taken care of. They'll be riding around on the lunar rover again. Somebody remarked that the difference between riding time and station time is a little bit like the vacation driver, where you have to face a choice of driving 800 miles a day and not seeing anything, or only making 250 miles that day and stopping at all the sites in between. So I guess that's the choice that has to be made, of course not by the astronauts, but by Houston. And incidentally, Wilson, have you noticed that there's a real rapport here, which has been, I won't say lacking on prior flights, but it hasn't been quite this good, I think, on some of the prior flights, in which from time to time the astronauts on prior flights have said, no, we don't want to do that, and they've done something else. This time, the Capcom, mostly Joe Allen, has been really a part of the lunar team. It was almost like he was on the lunar surface. Of course, Joe Allen, a lot of this is due to him, the capsule communicator in Houston. He is an astronaut, a trained astronaut. He's also a trained geologist. So he knows exactly what the men are going through, exactly what they're going through in as far as he has done it many times, but of course never on the moon. So as Peter says, there certainly has been a great rapport among the 3 men up, the 2 on the moon, Scott and Irwin, Worden above the moon, about 60 miles, still orbiting around in the Endeavour command spaceship, and Joe Allen, and of course all the hundreds and hundreds of scientists on the ground in Houston who keep monitoring the heartbeat and the respiration and the water they have left and the oxygen they have left, among the hundreds of things that they keep charge up. One of the reasons that the mission today outside the Falcon is going to be shorter than previously expected is that
1 minute, Marty.
Yesterday, Scott and Irwin said, I think we've found what we've come for. And of course what they went up to the moon to do in this particular area of the moon was to get some rock or some moon crust that would be a basis for deciding just exactly how old the moon is. From that they will know more about the solar system, and from knowing more about the solar system they will know eventually more about our Earth's environment and perhaps how to take care of it, find where we could perhaps find more oil, things like that. They're now saying they're ready for decompression. Good. That's technically the beginning of EVA starts when they start depressing the cabin. That is decompressing the cabin. Usually takes them about 10 minutes.
Okay, gotta go for the depress. 16 ECS cabin repress to open.
This indicates, by the way, when they get to this point that everything's working smoothly, because if they can't decompress, they can't go out.
As we heard Joe Allen, you may not have heard Joe Allen in the background saying, the capsule communicator from Houston saying, you've got some beautiful suits there. Working.
And incidentally, if you've noticed, Wilson, one of the important things they do before they decompress is set up everything for recompression. In other words, all of the valves for recompression have to be set before they decompress, which makes a lot of sense. It's just like when they land on the moon, the first thing they do is prepare to take off. And when that is taken care of, then they can go about their business.
Going open. Well, they're going through their checklist as they depressurize the Falcon. Get ready to live on their, well, they're already living on their portable life support system.
Wilson, you were talking about that anorthosite a few minutes ago.
We didn't quite get to that.
Well, this is really apparently, although we don't know for sure, but it may be really a prize piece of the moon. Of course, they're all prizes. Dr. Robin Brett, the chief geochemist at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, says if they've got this anorthosite, as they think they may have, they have a crystalline, coarse-grained piece, which is probably, according to Dr. Brett, a piece of original lunar material, which would be perhaps more than 4.3 billion years old. It's interesting to think in those terms. I can't really, but
it's about as old as I feel this early in the morning.
But this would really be a prize, because as of now, nothing of this has turned up. Apollo 11 and 12 astronauts returned chiefly with basalt, younger rocks that had cooled rapidly on the lunar surface. And in contrast, this piece of anorthosite, which we might spell for those who are unfamiliar with it, anorthosite, anorthosite, cooled slowly below the surface, and analysis is expected to yield hard evidence of the moon's formation, and then by extension, perhaps, clues to the creation of the Earth and the other bodies in the solar system. Hopefully, this all can be spelled out by this one piece. Quite a prize.
Again, astronauts Scott and Irwin are depressurizing the Falcon, getting ready to step out onto the moon's surface for their third journey. A shortened journey today. Instead of 6 hours originally planned, probably closer to 4 or 5. Preparing for the lunar ascent.
Not for any emergency basis.
Because they've already done the work that they set out to do. So this is just a joyride today. Perhaps more, as you were saying earlier, this is the tourist ride when you can stop whenever you want.
Right.
You're not worried about
stop and take pictures.
Not worried about getting it spot A, or well, they are worried about getting back to the lunar surface. I mean, to the lunar module. That is.
I'll tell you, the drugstore is going to have a lot of film to develop when these tourists get back.
200 miles of film they're taking.
Today's expedition is going to be concentrated, as we said, on that winding canyon called Hadley Rill, which at some points is more than 1,000 feet deep, at some points a mile wide, and it runs 60, 70, or 80 miles, winding along the lunar surface. It looks very much, as you see it through a telescope, and some of the pictures we've had, like a dry riverbed. But, of course, there's no evidence that water ever existed on the moon's surface, so that's really kind of guessing in the worst or the wildest sense. And the scientists now think, as we said before, that this was formed, this Grand Canyon-like affair, by lava channels formed when molten rock flowed from part of the base of the Apennine Mountains into what is now called the Marsh of Decay. Hopefully, when they get there, they can take a sample of it. They can take some good close-up pictures with that 500-millimeter lens, and perhaps, just perhaps, we may come up with the answer.
Another few minutes before Commander Scott steps down on the moon. He's always the first one to step down on the moon's surface. He will be followed by Irwin about 10 minutes later, before their third moon journey. Peter, you were telling me yesterday, fascinating me yesterday, about the takeoff from the moon, which, of course, is a very important point of their voyage. take off from the moon, how they prepare for this. For example, will the fact that the Falcon is now tilting at about a 10-degree angle, will this have any effect on their liftoff?
Well, it'll have an effect, obviously, because they're lifting off not straight up as they would like to do. That's the optimal situation. But it has no real substantive effect, because what happens is, before they lift off, all of these factors are cranked into the computer, which is on board the lunar module. And what happens is, as you know, the bottom half of the lunar module stays on the moon. That becomes the launching pad. The top half, which has another rocket in it, an ascent stage rocket, takes off, and the second that it leaves the bottom half of the lunar module, these various things are taken into consideration in firing the rocket. So this
That way the post office can do its job right and give you the kind of mail service you're paying for. Remember, mail moves the country, and zip code moves the mail.
Good morning again. This is Peter Hackess along with Wilson Hall at the NBC News Apollo Space Center, continuing NBC's live, continuous coverage of the day's activities on the moon, including, of course, the first and prime purpose of the morning, to get out on the lunar surface again and make what's called EVA 3, the third motorized traverse of the moon. Then later today, at 1:11 p.m. Eastern Time, the lunar lander Falcon, at least the top half of it, will lift off the moon and head for a link-up with the Endeavour, the command and service module, which has been orbiting the moon low these many hours. The two astronauts on the moon rejoining astronaut Worden, who's been making some very important scientific observations of the moon as he goes around. And then after that, something we may have forgotten, although it's happened on all prior flights, the Falcon, or the top half of it, is to be sent crashing back to the moon, completing its mission by creating a moonquake. The impact of the Falcon's crash on the silent atmosphereless moon is being measured by the science station that astronauts Scott and Irwin are setting up on the moon, in fact, have set up. So this is the kind of sort of a bonus that they get before they send the final upper section of the lunar module crashing into the moon core, where it will remain, of course, a pile of junk for eternity. They're a little behind today, only because they've been given an extra hour of sleep, but they are just about now to step out again. Astronaut Scott will be the first to get to the lunar surface. Everything thus far this morning has gone well, and presumably when they get out, they'll walk over to their parked lunar rover and take off. I hope they put enough dimes in that parking meter last night. If not, the traffic cops on the moon were very, very busy last night. Alternate side of the moon parking.
And Jim, the burger valve is yours as well.
Which, again, this is a check just a few moments before they step out of the Falcon onto the moon's surface for the third time.
What you're hearing are the voices of both astronauts as they converse with Joe Allen, who is the capsule communicator located in Houston. And it's the same routine that they did yesterday. Joe Allen must be a little tired at this point. He's been up a good many hours, as have all of us. But he works very well with these two gentlemen.
The astronauts have been awake now for almost 4 hours. A lot of that time has been taken up by putting on their spacesuits. And the reason for this, of course, is when they climb into the Falcon at night after their busy days on the moon, they take off those spacesuits and get into some coveralls. This is the first time this has been done, and they were very, very pleased with it last night. One of the two astronauts, I've forgotten which, said, if you've got to go up on the moon, this is the only way to do it, is to get out of those spaces and be able to relax in those coveralls, at least during the rest and sleep period.
And they have hammocks that they've been sleeping in. Now, this is also true on the last flight, on Apollo 14, but I can recall on the earlier flights, particularly Apollo 11, there was absolutely no place for those gentlemen to sleep. They were sitting on top of the rocket casing and trying to curl up in a corner. And if you've ever seen the inside of a large tin can, that's about what it's like with all that instrumentation. Not much room. The scientists at Houston, in addition to being very eager to find out what makes up the Hadley rill, they want them to sample the plane, and they've been doing that. The plane on which they've been living, that flat Maria area. It represents what's called a small lunar sea. Of course, there's no sea there, and perhaps never was, but the ancients called it a sea because it looked like a sea from the Earth. The geologists want to see if it differs in age or makeup from the large flatlands explored by Apollo 11 and 12 in 1969. Apparently it does, although they haven't been able to gauge it yet. They won't be able to until the samples come back. Some of the samples apparently are quite exciting, at least from what they said yesterday. Scott came out with a couple of really interesting remarks. Things like, oh man, look at that.
They were excited like little boys finding, children finding shells on
I think they would be.
Sure, of course.
That's what this is the climax of their careers.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll turn around. You just heard Scott saying he's turning around, getting ready to open the hatch to climb out on the moon for their third day on the moon's surface.
He'll be backing out. This is really the only way to do it.
Our channel might cover that.
It's interesting to note that in the first 2 days, and they'll add to this today, they've collected almost 157 pounds of moon samples.
Like a chip bag.
Far more than ever before.
And one of the reasons they could do this is because they have that lovely old lunar buggy.
Right.
They could load it on.
Without that, they just couldn't bring it back.
Too heavy.
Now, last time, they had that little two-wheeled rickshaw that they carried around with them, and it helped somewhat. But it's nothing nearly as complex or as helpful as the lunar rover. Yesterday, as he was preparing to get outside, Commander Scott had a little trouble with the antenna on his back suit, and I just heard him say, how's the antenna today? And he says, it looks like it's okay. It did nothing with the communications yesterday.
Could you verify for us, please, that one of the two dump valves is open?
Joe Allen from Houston asking a question of...
Yes, the forward one is open, Joe.
Sounds good, Jim. Thank you.
Okay, send her out.
A few moments
I'll get you back
from now, Commander Scott, actually an Air Force colonel, but he's called commander because he's the overall commander of the Apollo 15. Colonel Scott will step down on the moon surface for the third trip. He'll be followed in about 10 minutes by Jim Irwin, a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. Their trip today is somewhat curtailed. It was to be about 6 hours out in their lunar buggy, bouncing about the moon's surface. They've cut that down to 4 or 5 hours, not because anything is going wrong, but because so many things have been going right. They have collected all of the geological samples that the ground-bound scientists and geologists want.
A word about the polarimetric filter. We're going to ask you to pick that up from the mesa and put it on your camera from the very first. We've got a dandy spot for you to do some polarimetric photographs later on.
All right. Okay, I'm heading down, Jim. Scott, see the only sea out there. Where is it, down on the surface? Oh, it's over here on the right. Okay, listen, when you get down there, remember that I don't see all your batteries in that footpath. But
Scott is backing out of the
captain. I'll get your, oh, it's the checklist somewhere. Sure.
Scott and Irwin have communications with each other as well as the capsule communicator on the ground at Houston.
Oh, it's nice to be outside where you can stretch a little bit.
Scott is outside and stretching a little bit, as you heard.
Won't be long before he'll be on the lunar surface again. Perhaps less than 10 minutes.
While he's on the ground, Scott is on the ground, Irwin finishes up a little housekeeping details, dusts around under the knickknacks and that sort of thing, before he crawls out and joins them, and they climb on the rover. They have some particular photographic missions they want them to do today. As we heard just a little earlier, Joe Allen from Houston said, we've got a Band-Aid spot picked out for you to take some photometric pictures.
What they have to do, among other things, is to dispose of some waste and things that they're not going to use again. Each day they bring that out onto the lunar surface. It's one of the chores they do before they start out. They also have to hatches closed.
Okay, Jim, thank you.
Another thing, of course, that has to be done each day is to bring out some of the tools that will be necessary and the cameras.
Going to internal now.
Okay, Dave, and could you check the LRV back covers closed at the same time?
Now they're open, and I will close them now.
They don't leave the cameras out on the lunar
Right, those
surface.
automatic devices fail us every now and then.
Okay, we have Marshall calm on Lord.
Although both Irwin and
Roger,
Scott
both
are
loud and clear.
on the ground, they still have not been able to send back their television pictures to Houston, of course, because they haven't, they're not in any position where the television camera can see them as yet. They will be in sight of their camera on the rover, which is mounted on the rover. They'll be within sight of that in a few moments. In the meantime, as they've just stepped out,
Battery already?
now Houston Control tells us they're getting some pictures from the moon. Camera set up on rover 1, the television camera. Controlled, by the way, as we all know now, by Houston.
Down here.
250 million miles away, the operator operates the camera on the rover on the moon.
Okay.
So Houston now reports they're getting live color pictures from rover 1 for their third moon journey of astronauts Scott and Irwin. An easy day, as we have said before. They have been told that they should just play it cool, take it easy. As Joe Allen earlier said, it's gravy all the way. You did so much in the last 2 days that anything you do today is just frosting on the cake, to mix the cooking metaphor. Frosting on the cake or gravy, whichever it is.
Into the CDR foot pan goes Mag Union.
Astronauts Scott and Irwin on the moon for their last day.
On November, so we brought that along.
An equipment check by both of them before they get onto the lunar rover, that $8 million lunar buggy of theirs. Been working beautifully after the first day, as we know.
LMT's camera with Tango.
Roger.
They're checking their camera equipment.
Yes, Tango camera.
Not so much the camera equipment as the magazines that go with the cameras. The Tangos, all of the initials, the alphabetical designations have to do with their magazines. They keep very close track.
Romeo.
That's another magazine they're checking. Yeah, we got that one. Worden is having a little bit of trouble up 60 miles above the moon with one of his cameras. Doesn't seem to be focusing correctly. Getting blurry pictures just as some of us do with our ground-bound cameras. It's not his fault. It's all automatically controlled. There's nothing Worden can do about it. Again, Scott and Irwin are on the moon surface within a few moments to get aboard their lunar rover buckle the seatbelt, take off at about 6 to 8 miles an hour to their first stop, to the rim of Hadley Rill, that mile-wide, 1,000-foot-deep gorge that runs 60 miles or so along that part of the moon's surface. They landed in the Hadley area, the Hadley Rill area, the Apennine mountain area, for very specific reasons, and to get some lunar crust, rocks, and some lunar soil, find out exactly how old the moon was. The other landings were about 500 miles south of where Scott and Irwin landed. The other Apollo missions had a lot of lava, but they didn't get much, if any, of the original moon crust, or what geologists think the moon crust is. If you want to know exactly, I started to say, if you want to have an idea of where Scott and Irwin are, if you're looking at a full moon, they're landed in the right eye of the man on the moon. So if you've got a full moon, which none of us has at this particular time, you've got a full moon, they're sort of in the right eye of the man on the moon, the picture of the man on the moon that we see. Scott and Irwin are down on the surface of the moon, preparing to make their third and last journey before sending blasting off from the moon.
They've handled the whole moon thing very well as far as the moon samples are concerned. There's been cooperation worldwide. I think 104 countries have taken part in the studies.
Jim, this is Houston. We prefer bag 2 under your seat still and bag 7 on the hand tool carrier instead.
The first day on the lunar rover, they had some trouble with the front wheel steering. That was fixed on the second day.
It's on the left side. It's just a question of which one you want on the right side, and which one you want on me.
Jim, bag 8 on the right side, please.
Do you have this trouble with your wife when you're packing your car? No, put it over here. No, put it over there.
That's right. Exactly.
No, put it under there.
And what's left over goes under the seat.
Here on in.
Houston can monitor the activities of the gentleman on the moon in two ways. One through a television picture, which is now being transmitted from the lunar surface to Houston, and also by reading a whole series of telemetry readings, which are being transmitted by radio from all of the systems on the moon into Houston control, including telemetry of the astronauts themselves, their heartbeat, and breathing, and so forth. Very important. It's amazing to think that the bottom part of the lunar module and the lunar rover will be resting on the moon just as they are today, perhaps for the next millennia. Someone who comes by and makes a moon landing, say 1 million years from now, I hope will understand what went on in 1971.
What was the source of the battery you just plugged in for us?
Came out of the LMP's footprint pass where I picked it up. The one that was in the plus C foot pass.
Houston Control knows where everything is stowed, and they know everything that's going on.
Okay, Dave, thank you.
And that's a very good thing, because if something is missed, overlooked, left behind, not a half a minute goes by, but what Houston says, go back and do it over again, or go back and pick it up.
Yeah, let me meet you up there.
It was yesterday, I think it was, Peter, that one of them thought that he had lost or misplaced a bag or left a bag of samples of rocks behind. And he finally figured out, oh no, he hadn't. He put it in another place and forgotten about it. And Mission Control, Joe Allen, said, hey, we knew that all along. We just wanted to keep you honest. So they were keeping you safe. Very close track of where everything went, goes, should go. Scott and Irwin on the moon, loading up the rover, getting ready for their third journey. This is Wilson Hall with Peter Hackess at NBC News Apollo Space Center, covering the third and last day of astronaut Scott and Irwin's stay on the moon's surface. now loading up their lunar rover, the moon buggy, for their third and last day trip on the surface of the moon. Today's surface trip has been shortened from about 6 hours to 4 or 5 hours. Again, they have not decided exactly how much. Shortened not because there are any problems, but because they've done everything in the first 2 days. Everything that they were supposed to do. The scientists are happy, the geologists are happy. So today they've been told to take it easy, play it cool, just ride around, about 6 miles or so. Probably that will be shortened somewhat too. And collect some more samples, take photographs of where the samples are taken from, and get back into the area of the lunar module in time to make all preparations for lifting off from the moon. Lifting off from the moon is scheduled for 1:11 Eastern Time this afternoon. After they take off from the moon at 1:11, if all goes well, at least that's the way it's scheduled, then it will be another couple of hours before the lunar module, the Falcon, docks with the command ship, the Endeavour, which has been piloted these past 3 days by Al Worden. The command ship is about 60 miles above the moon.
Your ship buttoned up there. When you move out to the drill site, we'll want you to photograph the collapsed material in the trench and do a photo pan around the core there. And Jim, maybe you can see if you can pull the core out of the ground while Dave's doing that, and then he'll give you a hand.
Well, that's the first assignment.
Okay. You're secured there, Dave. Okay.
They've been told to move out to the site of the core,
We finally figured it out.
which is about 3 feet long.
Dave, before you leave.
And it has been driven into the surface of the moon. And their first chore will be go out there and take some pictures and remove that core for returning to Earth.
I've got the color. I know it.
They got to sleep an extra hour this morning in their cramped quarters. They're out now at the area of the experimental package where they drilled a core in the Earth. Familiar moon lope, as you called it yesterday. Lunar lope, I guess you called it, Peter. As they...
He's always thinking.
Remember at the time of Apollo 11, some smart dance instructor came up with a dance called the Lunar Lope. And it was so popular, I think it lasted a week and a half. But
With the dance instructor, probably nobody else.
It was good for a few headlines.
1, 2, 3.
Still trying to dislodge that tube, which apparently is moving very slowly.
1, 2, 3. One pause. 3. Okay, I got it. Okay, let me have it now. Okay, you got it. Okay, so close the gate. Okay. It's closed. Okay, let me put up the device here. No, just leave it alone. Okay, it's up. Yeah, you don't. Somebody help me pull again. But I had it. I thought you did too. It's a 2-man job. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Oh, there we go. We almost flew with it. Okay.
They now have it removed. After all that tugging and pulling and hauling, they now have the core removed from the lunar surface. It's about 5 feet long. It took a lot of doing.
Putting the Jeep, not the Jeep, Eastern Time. As Wilson said, we hope to see and hear it as the men fly back into lunar orbit. During their first orbit, they will link up and dock with the command ship, the Endeavour. And then for the next couple of days, a little more than 2 days actually, they'll be circling the moon, carrying out further scientific experiments before they start the trans-Earth insertion, that is, the long 250,000-mile coast back to Earth. During today's abbreviated moon excursion, the men got back to the limb in time to do a little postal chore before this final wrap-up. They had a special Moon Explorer stamp. And here's how it went as the two men carried out this postal ceremony.
To show that our good postal service has deliveries any place in the universe, I have the pleasant task of canceling here on the moon the first stamp of a new issue dedicated to commemorate United States achievements in space. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen pictures of the stamp. There's the first one here on an envelope. At the bottom it says United States in Space, a decade of achievement. And I'm very proud to have the opportunity here to play postman and pull out a cancellation device. Cancel this stamp. There's August the 2nd, 1971. First day of issue. What could be a better place to cancel the stamp than right here at Hadley-Rille?
That stamp will be on sale in Cape Kennedy, in Huntsville, Alabama, and in Houston, Texas today. The general public, those of you who collect stamps, will be able to buy it in your local post office sometime tomorrow. They printed about 200,000 of these special Apollo 15 stamps. NBC's coverage of the flight of Apollo 15 will continue after this message.
Apollo 15, man's fourth journey to the surface of the moon, and still an American piloted venture. American space scientists now are looking to the future, at a time when there'll be participation by astronauts from other countries in NASA flights. It could be sooner than we expected. The groundwork has been laid. NASA has entered into some 250 agreements for international space projects. We've orbited foreign satellites, flown foreign experiments on our spacecraft, and we've involved more than 50 foreign scientists in the analysis of lunar surface samples. Direct daily reception of data from U.S. weather satellites is now carried by some 50 countries, and foreign nationals already participate extensively in the operation of NASA overseas tracking facilities. These projects benefit both the United States and our cooperating partners, and it could be soon, perhaps very soon, that we'll see a foreign astronaut. This is Al Nealon at the AFRTS Apollo Desk.
This is Wilson Hall with Russ Ward in the NBC News Apollo Space Center, covering the third and last day on the moon before Scott and Irwin lift off from the moon. That's scheduled for 1:11 Eastern Time this afternoon. Today's third and last day on the lunar surface was a shortened trip, not because anything was going wrong, but because everything had been going right before this. Houston Control says they did all of their experiments in the first 2 days they had on the moon, so everything was done, and today all they had to do was do a little sightseeing. The sightseeing was done along Hadley-Rille, that mile-wide gorge, the 1,000-foot deep gorge. The gorge runs along about 62 miles or so along the lunar surface. They stood at the edge, the lip of this Hadley-Rille, photographing it for those back in the Houston Control Center with the camera, which was on the rover, photographing it also with movie cameras and with still cameras, and giving a running description of it as they stood there. Now they are back at the limb, the lunar module, carrying out the last few duties on the lunar surface before getting back into the Falcon.
Also, a few minutes ago, in addition to that, the cancellation of that lunar stamp, there was a little scientific exhibit by astronaut Irwin, taking us back to the days of Galileo. Here's how that went.
Well, in my left hand I have a feather, in my right hand a hammer. I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago, who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that?
How about
That proves that Mr. Galileo was correct in his findings.
That little display for the benefit of the ground controllers, and indeed the hammer and the feather did hit the ground at the same time. Falcon, of course, the code name for the lunar module, which took the men down to the surface of the moon, and in just about 3 hours will lift them off again. 4 hours.
Russ, I wonder if they sneak that Falcon feather aboard. Everything is supposed to be fireproof. I'll see if I can say it. Is it a fireproof Falcon feather?
That's something we'll leave for further exploration. All going very well right now. We're getting lots of communication between the flyers and Houston's mission control. Let's eavesdrop for just a minute.
And Dave, we'd like for you to align the high gain per the checklist procedures, but we're standing by for your readings on how possible you think that is because of the dim intensity of the Earth.
These are the final preparations prior to the lunar module liftoff, set for 1:11 p.m. Eastern Time. All been going very well with the flight of Apollo 15. The astronauts now back at their limb. They have just a short time yet to stay on the moon's surface. You're listening to NBC News.
This is NBC News, the flights of Apollo 15. This is Wilson Hall in the NBC News Apollo Space Center. Astronauts Scott and Irwin are now back at the Falcon, the lunar module. They are now making their final preparations for their liftoff from the moon, which is scheduled for 1:11 this afternoon Eastern Time. They have driven the rover vehicle, the lunar buggy, out about 100 yards from the Falcon. They will leave it there with its television camera on it to take pictures of that liftoff later this afternoon. NBC coverage of the flight of Apollo 15 will continue after this message.
Hi. On May 5th, 1961, after...
This is Wilson Hall, NBC News in the Apollo Space Center.
Russ Ward with Wilson Hall in the Apollo Space Center as we await the return of the two men into their lunar module Falcon. The men are now passing into the limb. The items they plan to bring back with them, some of the experiments, some of the packages of rocks and lunar dust, and some of the equipment they want to bring back, all in preparation for the 1:11 p.m. liftoff this afternoon. Here's what we can expect during the afternoon following liftoff. Shortly after 3 o'clock, 3:09 is the scheduled time, the Falcon will dock with the command ship Endeavour, and Scott and Irwin will then transfer their rock samples to the command ship and rejoin astronaut Al Worden in that command module. At 55 minutes past 6 Eastern Time, the Falcon is to be cut away from the Endeavour. Then tomorrow, it's mostly a rest period and the start of 2 days of lunar observation. Late on Wednesday, the command ship with the 3 men in it will start the trip back to Earth.
During today's shortened lunar excursion, we could hear Commander Scott, the commander of the Apollo 15, we could hear him get a little exasperated with mission control. This is the first time we've ever heard that. What had happened is they had drilled a core yesterday into the lunar surface, and today we're trying to pull it out. It was on the schedule, and they had more difficulty pulling it out than they thought. They huffed and they puffed, and it took them about 10 minutes to get it out. They finally got it out, and then there were 2 sections of this. They wanted to break it into 2 sections so it would be much easier to get back into the Falcon, the lunar module, and they were having difficulty with that. And after they worked on that for a little while, Scott indicated that he was a little miffed by saying, look, we've been spending about an hour on this. Is it all that important? And Joe Allen, the capsule communicator in Houston, very calmly and coolly simply said, we'll leave that to you. And so they did not get it separated, by the way. They're still going to try that, although ground control has figured out a way length, about 8 foot, 5 to 8 feet, of pipe, lead pipe, which is actually a core that went down into the earth. They figured out a way they can get that long one on the lunar module, even without taking it apart. Again, showing us how much help Houston Control is to the astronauts as they are on the moon, a 250,000 miles away.
As a matter of fact, the help they got from Houston was mentioned in connection with a Bible quotation earlier today. One of the astronauts said as he looked out across the lunar landscape, quoted a verse from the Psalms in which he talked about looking under the hills from whence cometh my help. And he said, of course, we're getting a little help from Houston, too. They've been getting a lot of help from Houston. There's no question about that. The men now in conversation with Houston as they're lining up the antenna in preparation for their re-entry into the lunar module. Let's listen to some of this conversation as we pick it up between the moon and Houston. Houston's mission control.
Dave, cycle the switch internal and external once for us, please.
External. All right. Internal. External.
Joe Allen, the capsule communicator in Houston, talking with Mission Commander David Scott. Television transmission from the moon has been cut off temporarily. The camera was heating up, and the men, Houston decided they wanted to save that camera for the very important picture of the liftoff from the LEM. Now we're getting
let me verify that
TV signal back from the moon once again.
Is the important thing and not the angle at which the grid intersects the local vertical. Is that correct?
Dave, that's more or less correct. I think we're satisfied with the alignment here.
The camera
we just
actually
need some help on tilting our camera up to the level.
The camera is kind of tilted over, and all it's showing is one of the fenders on the lunar module. They have a little trouble with that camera. If it tilts down too far or tilts up too high, they cannot control it
Dave,
from the Earth.
We need some help bumping our camera up, please.
Okay, Joe.
The lunar rover parked in the vicinity of
What camera?
the lunar
Okay,
module.
thank you. And I guess our only other request is to take the dust brush with you back to the LEM. However, we may have Rock, and we may have overshot on the camera. We might have to have some help getting it back towards the horizontal.
Camera now pointing toward the stars.
Okay.
A minute ago it was pointing too far down, now it's pointing too far out.
Comment on the mountain that's south of Hadley. I can see some large outcrops on the upper slopes, on the upper 10%. And they really stand out, and there's a tailless downslope. As a matter of fact, it almost looks like we have some layering on the upper slopes, the upper 10%. Apparently.
Okay, Dave, we copy that. We need the camera fixed.
Yes, sir. Go right there.
Roger, and we're interested in
5 degrees.
Right, we're interested in moving on back towards the LEM. Carry the dust brush with you.
They've been fascinated all day today, Russ, in the Hadley Rill of these layers that they're seeing, particularly the layers in this Hadley Rill, which will mean a great deal to geologists to figure it out, whether it was just one color or whether it had been built up over layers. In other words, whether it's just been one run of hot lava when the moon was being formed or after the moon had been formed, or whether there were a series of runs of hot lava that cut that deep gorge, thousands of feet, Hadley Rill Gorge on the moon's surface.
Geology has been the name of the game throughout this whole mission.
It's only up about 10 degrees.
Right, Dave, I think Ed must have lost control.
The astronauts have been about as excited as the geologists on Earth about what they've found.
They certainly were today. You would think after 2 days on the surface that they would have calmed down a little, but they still were excited today as they were driving along, saying what a beautiful sight, particularly of the mountains that they were seeing, and the Hadley Rill, the geological monstrosity there in the mountain. And carrying on as they have all of the 3 days that they've been on the lunar surface. Not as long on the lunar surface as they had intended to be,
we're ready
as long as, but then not
into Falcon and climb in.
They've been told to climb back into the Falcon. Yep.
Okay. As the spaceport Reisling would say, we're ready for you to come back again to the homes of men on the cool green hills of Earth.
We're getting poetic.
Thank you, Joe. We're ready to.
Non-geological expression on the part of Joe Allen, the capsule communicator.
Fabulous place up here.
They've positioned the lunar rover, about 100 yards from the LEM, the lunar module. It will, of course, stay on the moon, along with that experimental package, along with the television camera on the rover, along with the American flag that they've planted, with their footsteps in the rover's wheel marks, tire marks.
Dave, I ought to start getting in. Good.
Roger, Tim.
Let me brush it off maybe a little, partner. I'm almost there.
That's the voice of Jim Irwin talking about moving back into the lunar module. He will be followed back in by Dave Scott. Both men brushing off their spacesuits so they don't carry a lot of lunar surface material in with them.
Okay. Brush it off.
And the things that they'll leave on the moon, I forgot to mention that falcon feather.
It's really nice.
The two men at the base of the lunar module to soon start up the ladder and back in.
Ready, you can dust me off.
What will be their taxi back into lunar orbit.
Although they have been told, Russ, that by Houston Control, that they have done the 100% of the experiments that they set out to do, did them before they even went out on their third day today. They didn't travel as far in distance as they had planned to.
Jim, while you're dusting there, how many suitcases have you carried up?
They plan to cover an area of about 22 square miles.
Two up there, there are two more down here, plus the ETB.
Okay, and
core stem up there on the porch.
Okay, good. Good, and that core stem will go inside and lie on the floor against the midstep.
Okay, we understand. Man, I'm glad we got that core. Baby's core. I'll tell you. Okay, Dave, I think you're going to get you. Okay. You take that along. Oh, here's another bag.
The two astronauts now gathering up the final material to be placed aboard the LEM, brushing off each other's spacesuits as they get ready to move back in and start preparations for the return to lunar orbit. That's the story on Apollo 15 up to this moment.